for accepting our invitation to give us a lecture and deleting them beside. Thank you for giving the
Well, thank you very much for the invite to the lecture to the research committee here. It's my great pleasure to do so. I'll try to talk as slow as possible so that you can understand my accent. Of course, English is probably difficult for a lot of you, but also with it being a Northern Ireland accent, it's even more difficult. So I'll try to make it as clear as possible, but if you don't understand anything, just raise your hand or ask me to repeat it, and I'll do that for you. So the talk that I'm going to do is entitled Popular Worship in Ancient Egypt, the rekhyt-rebus. This was the title that I gave a few days ago, but the lecture has actually changed a little bit. The second half will look specifically at the rekhyt-rebus. The first half will look specifically at who the rekhyt people were and how they are depicted. The topic itself is in my PhD thesis, which was entitled An Analysis and Interpretation of the Role of the rekhyt people within the Egyptian Temple, which I submitted in 2013 and completed and was approved in January of 2014. The main questions that I looked at in my thesis were: who were the rekhyt people? What did the rekhyt people do? What did the rekhyt people perform? When did the rekhyt people perform their actions of maintenance, as I've called them? And I'll come on to that a little bit later. Where did they perform them? Why? And a large section was focused specifically on the function of the rekhyt-rebus, which I'll come on to later. I'm sure it's familiar with many of them. As for the scope of my thesis, well, it covered the earliest examples of the appearance of the rekhyt, or the lapwing, which is from the proto-dynastic period, around about 3200 BC, and continuing right through to the Roman period, around about the last inscription mentioned in the rekhyt is from around about 250 AD. So this is a period of 3,500 years, a large scope. And also in area, I was including sites from Tapazaris Magna in the Mediterranean Sea, right through to Jebel Barkal, deep in the heart of Nubia. I looked at both textual as well as iconographic sources. And in total for my thesis, I decided to look at 2,000 attestations of the word rekhyt. In my database I have over 2,500 now, but I had to really draw to a close, otherwise I would never finish the thesis. So I decided to stop at 2,000 and not go any further. And for my thesis I included 441 core texts, mainly which referred to the rekhyt people performing various actions. Of course, the rekhyt is very much symbolized by the lapwing bird, which you can see in this picture, just one down here and another one here. This is from the tomb of a minimum hat, TT 82, which some of you may have visited before. There's actually two types of lapwings which were present in Pharaonic Egypt. There's the northern lapwing, which you can see here on the left-hand side from a relief of the red chapel of Hatshepsut at Karnak. And this is the bird on the right-hand side in the wild. And then there's the black-headed plover. And on the left-hand side, that's a hieroglyph from the tomb of Bakhet at Beni Hassan. And again, the bird in the wild. So they're quite distinctive. Although the hieroglyph itself, it's really impossible for most of the hieroglyphs to tell them apart. They're used synonymously with one another. Well, what or who are the rekhyt people? There's been many theories going back from the very beginning of Egyptology. People like Champollion even mentioned the rekhyt people or the rekhyt bird, the lapwing. And the earliest theories really suggest that the rekhyt people were pure spirits, that there was something to do with them being kind of pure, possibly from the root of the word rekhyt, which means to wash. And this is what really was put forward for the first 50 years of Egyptology, with the language being developed. But then you have Peter Le Neuf in the late 1800s, and he described the three groups of people: the Pat people, the rekhyt people, and the Hennemet people. They're very closely linked with one another. He described the Pat people as the people from the past, the rekhyt people as the people from the present, and the Hennemet people, those of the future. But there's no evidence for this. Where he came up with this theory, nobody knows. It was quickly dismissed because there was no evidence. And the term rekhyt is very difficult to really understand or translate. And perhaps more so you can really see this with Budge. We all know that Budge wrote many books on ancient Egypt. And in his books, he describes the rekhyt people as different groups. The gentry, people who are living in heaven, mankind, mortals, living beings, rational beings, men of understanding, spiritual beings. So you can see he had difficulty with the term. He couldn't decide what to call them. So even the first one there, he calls the Hennemet people the gentry, the rekhyt people being the instructed class, and then the Pat people being the peasants, labourers and slaves, which is actually in reverse to how Egyptologists really see it today. In the second half of the 1800s, the 19th century, you see Egyptologists playing on the idea that the word rekhyt comes from the word rek, to know. And so you have various theories here, as you can see. So in English, the enlightened people, or people who know. What does that mean? What does it mean to know? What do they know? First, in 1926, you have the rekhyt people being proposed as a group of people who resided from the Delta, in the area of Lower Egypt. And this is based largely on one object, the scorpion mace head, which I'll show you a picture of in a second. But then in 1958, Clary published a fragment of an object, a part of a coffin, which he saw in an auction shop in Cairo. Nobody knows where this piece is now, unfortunately, and it's not complete. But I'll show you a picture in a second. He suggests this supports the idea of the rekhyt people as being from the Delta. But while we have these two pieces, these two ethnographical pieces, we really don't have any inscriptions. There's no inscriptions supporting the rekhyt people as being predominantly from the Delta region. Here's the famous scorpion mace head, which was discovered at Hierakonpolis in 1898, and it's now on display in the Ashmolean Museum in Oxford. But the important thing here is the lapwings on the very top, hanging from the nooses. And the interpretation of this is that here we have the pharaoh depicted twice, wearing both the white crown and the red crown, and this is him having defeated the people from the Delta, who are here symbolised by the lapwings. And the fragment published by Clary, as I said, it's not complete, but down the very bottom here, you have these two people with the lapwing, or three people with the lapwings crest. It is very much damaged, but what it seems to be, and there are similar sarcophagi to this, is that it's a map of the world. It's a map of kind of Egypt, really. And so you've got this circle here, Egypt in the middle, and you've got all the gnomes going around the outside. And the suggestion here is that these are associated with one of the gnomes from Lower Egypt. Now what I should say is that the presence of the lapwing's crest does not 100% guarantee that you have the rekhyt people. Because there are a few rare occasions when you have the Pat people, or even the Hennemet people, or even foreigners who have the lapwing's crest. And if we look at inscriptions, we see that they're present not just in Lower Egypt. Here's an inscription from the Wadi Halmat, and it talks about one of the wonders which happened to the vizier Amenemhat in the 11th dynasty. And it talks about this wonder that had been heard by those who are in Egypt. the rekhyt people who are in both Upper and Lower Egypt. So very specifically, it's referring to the rekhyt people in both Upper and Lower Egypt. This is in the 11th dynasty. Another suggestion was that the rekhyt people were followers of the god Seth. And it's based on 3 inscriptions. So 3 inscriptions out of 2,000 that I examined. Not very many. It was first proposed by Victor Larrey in 1906, where he refers to the Pat people as the followers of Horus, the rekhyt people as the followers of Seth, and the Hennumet people the followers of Osiris. The inscription that he uses for this evidence, as you can see, is damaged, and it's from Kamumbo. So we're going right down into the Ptolemaic period for this. Difficult to read. You seem to certainly have something for Horus. Is it the Pat people for Horus? Then you seem to have the rekhyt people for Seth, and then you have the Hennumet people for perhaps Osiris. We don't know. So it's not very strong evidence to support the idea that they were followers of Seth. And as well as that, you have 2 fragments, again very damaged, of the Ramesseum dream book. This is a passage which interprets dreams. And 2 of the dreams, it refers to the god within him is Seth. As for a man, something, he is a man of the rekhyt people. So you have Seth and the rekhyt people mentioned in the same sentence. And the same with the second one. A man of the rekhyt people, his lifetime is for Seth. And this is the only 3 conscriptions mentioning the rekhyt people in association with Seth. So it's not strong evidence. You may have heard them being referred to as rebellious foreigners. And you'll find that in most Egyptological literature, the rekhyt people are really portrayed as being very negative. The negative capacities of the rekhyt people are really highlighted. And you'll see this in some dictionaries, such as Hanig's lexicon. And to give you just one example of the inscriptions which support this idea, here we have one from the pyramid texts, and it says, he shall clear away from him the hostile rekhyt from under his fingers. So here the rekhyt people are referred to as being hostile in a kind of a negative capacity. And the idea that they were subjects or subjugated is certainly one of the most common descriptions of the rekhyt people nowadays. But what is vitally important to know is that while the rekhyt people are often found in association with foreigners or the 9 bows, unlike the 9 bows and foreigners, they're never actually shown underneath the feet of the pharaoh. That's in contrast to foreigners. And the earliest statue that we have, where you have the rekhyt people close to the feet of the pharaoh, is this famous one, which is now in the Imhotep Museum at Saqqara. It's a statue base of Djoser, dating to the 3rd dynasty. And there you can clearly see that the feet of the pharaoh are trampling on top of the 9 bows. And we have the lappings in front, but they're not under the feet. Now in total I have 20 statues, and they're never under the feet. So here's another one from the reign of Nephthnepo II, which is in the Cairo Museum. And again, you can see that these foreigners are clearly integrated into the statues, so that the pharaoh, and the statue itself is not here, but the feet would have been on top of these foreigners, and the rekhyt people are on the side, with their arms raised in adoration, in a positive manner, not as a negative manner, which is usually highlighted. So the negative characteristics of the rekhyt people is not particularly common. Out of 2,000 texts, only 57 highlight the negative characteristics. But it's usually these 57 texts which Egyptologists refer to. And usually it's restricted to magical texts or religious texts, such as the pyramid text. And what you find is that when they are present in these magical texts, it's usually not alone. They're there with lots of other groups, as I'll show you with an example. So they're never the sole protagonists. You can't really say that the rekhyt people have this negative characteristic without discussing all the others. So here's an example from the Chester of 89 papyrus, dating to the Ramesside period. And this is a magical text in order to protect the owner. And it says here, and I won't read the whole thing, but it just says, and there shall not take effect anything that is done against him by any Remech people, any Pat people, any rekhyt people, any Hennemeth people, foreigners of the southern lands, of the western lands, of the eastern country, males, females, any magicians, any male magicians, any female magicians. So here you have a group of 11 different categories that are highlighted. This is everybody, really. It's not specifically the rekhyt people. As the populace of Egypt mentioned, and this is the theory today, that the rekhyt people were the Tat people were the elite, the rekhyt people were the lower class, and then you have the Hennemeth people, who are often referred to as the sun people. Well, again, that's an entirely different thesis. What does it mean to be the sun people? Who are the Hennemeth people? So you've got all these negative characteristics in a way: commoners, plebs, common people, or simply the lapwing folk. I usually stick with the term rekhyt people because it doesn't really attach any particular class or any idea about the rekhyt people. It just keeps it kind of in that open space. And the inscription that you see at the bottom is how they appear in the onomasticon, which was published by Gardner. So you have groups of people, and they come in this order: Remech, Pat, rekhyt, and Hennemeth. Is there any particular reason for that order? Is it all to do with social class? Or is it maybe alphabetical? We don't know. So looking really at who the rekhyt people were, mythical beings was first proposed. Well, there's no evidence for this. Followers of Seth, 3 inscriptions to go by. It's really not much to support the idea that they may have been followers of Seth. Rebellious foreigners, yes, there are a few inscriptions, but as I said, only the negative characteristics of about 57 inscriptions out of 2,000 portray them in this way. People from the Delta, we only have the 2 objects, the scorpion mace head and the fragment of the coffin. So again, not very strong evidence. Well, what about this idea that they're lower class citizens? This common belief? Well, you might be surprised to know that the evidence, again, doesn't really support this idea. They're never actually referred to as being lower class, as opposed to the Pat people. In the 2,000 inscriptions, never are they once portrayed in this way. What is clear is that they were definitely Egyptians. There's no doubt about that. And you can see this from the inscriptions, as well as the iconography that they possess. So what do the texts tell us? What are these 2,000 texts all about? Well, you'll see that the positive idea of the rekhyt people is really portrayed. So in 27 of the texts, they're often referred to as being under the protection of the pharaoh or certain deities, such as this one from Hatshepsut. And it says, he, i.e. the god Amun, has chosen Hatshepsut to guard the rekhyt, to guard Egypt and to protect the Pat people and the rekhyt people. So if these were foreigners or anything like that, you wouldn't have Hatshepsut doing this. Or you even have a 25th dynasty stela, in which the negative confession, chapter 125 of the Book of the Dead, is changed so that one of the confessions is that I did not rob from the rekhyt people, which is quite an interesting one. You have 35 texts in which the gods are referred to as creating the rekhyt people. So this one here, into the Nile, says, in order to provide for the cattle that he, Amun-Re, created, the rekhyt people who came forth from his eye. Go who's referred to as the maker of the sky, who bore the gods, the maker of the land, the creator of the rekhyt people. And here specifically is the rekhyt people mentioned. Not the Renesh people, the Pat people, the Hennet people, specifically the rekhyt people. And you'll find the rekhyt people much more in inscriptions than you do the other groups of people. You have 192 inscriptions in which they're granted life from the pharaoh or the gods. That's a significant number. Again, you would expect this for foreigners. So, for example, when he, i.e. Amun-Re, rises, the rekhyt people live. Their hearts live when they see him. So here you have the god rising in the horizon, and because of that, the rekhyt people are allowed to live. Or the pharaoh is requested to libate to the gods, and in doing so, that enables the rekhyt people and the Pat people to live. So it's all part of a process. The pharaoh needs to be performing his duties for the gods to look after the rekhyt. And I'll come back to that a little bit later. But predominantly the most abundant type of texts, aside from titles, and I've excluded titles here because they don't tell us a great deal, but there's over 750 texts which give titles such as Medu Rekhyt, Hat Rekhyt, things like that. But the predominant type of text has the rekhyt people performing actions and gestures. Over 40 different terms are used. Of course, the most common is dua, to adore, but there's many other ones. There's praise, there's pray, there's to bow down, or there's to subjugate, etc. And this is best really highlighted in the text that I have here from the temple of Horus at Edfu. And it says, these rekhyt people jubilate in front of their Lord at the procession to Bekdet of Re. That's the name of the temple of Horus at Edfu. Dancing for their sovereign in front of the palace of the king as he has arrived at the mansion of the said festival. After going up to the throne at the front of Edfu before Bekdet, dappled of feathers, leaping for his majesty, acclaiming for his ka, kicking out their legs in front of before their lord, rejoicing at the great prince in front of his palace, exulting at the lord of the house, dancing for the ruler, revering his arrears, making great his power in front of the land, something to the king when he goes forth to the horizon of Re before Bekdet Re, master of the gods. So in this one inscription, the rekhyt people are described as performing 10 different gestures. Jubilating, dancing, kicking out their leg. I think it's pretty clear that it's some kind of dance. And you can see it even from the hieroglyphs, the determinatives that attach to these words. All of them have this, usually the Hindu gesture or other ones. So it's clear that these are actions and gestures performed. And specifically, this is done, as you can see from the text, during the said festival. So they had an active participation during religious festivals. And they had access to the temples in order to do this. Now the inscription that we have there actually comes in these lines. And there's the 3 rekhyt people directly in front of the pharaoh. Here's the pharaoh coming in procession during his said festival. You've got 3 rekhyt people performing the Hindu gesture. Down the bottom, we have the Pat people. And I like this one because although the Pat people are usually seen as being the elite, and the rekhyt people the lower class. Look at the inscription that you have for the rekhyt people. And this is the inscription that you have for the Pat. You would think it would be the other way around if it was the Pat people the elite and the rekhyt people the lower class. So the text that we have, and this is the breakdown of them, you can see that we have less than 10% if we add in the negative aspect, the Seth aspect, and the subjugated. Less than 10%. Whereas we have around about 50% if we exclude the titles as well, in which there's positive aspect to it. So much more for the positive aspect than you do for the negative aspect. As for the writing of the word rekhyt, Out of the 2,000 inscriptions, only 1,746 were kind of complete, that you can see the writing. But you'd be surprised that the word can be written 524 different ways, with the different consonants, etc. But most importantly, the determinatives which are used for them. And here's 14 of the determinatives used. And you'll usually only see maybe 3 of these. So this one, that one, and this one, or really that one. In any of the books, all of these other hieroglyphs I had to really make up myself. This one here, for example, and that one there, which you only find one. So these are hieroglyphs that really don't exist in Gardner's grammar or anything like that. They even survive into the Demotic and Greek script, and I won't talk too much about that, but in the Novus Decree, for example, where you have the word rekhyt written in hieroglyphs, but in Demotic, it's na remechu. So there certainly is a correlation between the rekhyt people and the remech, the people, during the Greco-Roman period. And you can see that really in these inscriptions. But what's very interesting is in the Paris rhyme, the rekhyt is written in hieroglyphs, but pa-mesha, the multitude, is written in the Demotic. So it's really certainly signifying a large group of people. And even into the Greek as well, Alpha. What about their iconography, their appearance? Well, we've got 3,500 years of iconography for the Lapwing. There's 3 basic forms. There's the zoomorphic, which is complete Lapwing. There's anthropomorphic, complete human. And then there's stereoanthropic, which is a mixture of the Lapwing, or a mixture of animals, and human features. Zoomorphic is the earliest. We've already seen the scorpion mace head, the statue base of Djoser, for example, and of course you've got the marsh scenes, although these technically are not the rekhyt people. They're just lapwings in the marshes. Another common iconography that you find is the pharaoh, or a child deity, holding a lapwing in their hand, grasping it. I have over 100 examples of this. But very interestingly, only one has a text which mentions the rekhyt people. And it's this one here from Hibbas Temple, and it says, "Your body is nourished by my milk, for Upper and Lower Egypt, and all the rekhyt people are united for you in your grasp." And it makes sense. He's grasping the rekhyt people. The pharaoh's grasping the rekhyt people in his hand. So this is an example of Merenptah, a relief from the Palace of Merenptah at Memphis, which is now in the Pennsylvania University Museum. And there you can clearly see the pharaoh is grasping the lapwing in his hand, and it's clearly intended to represent the rekhyt people, as we can see from the inscription earlier, and he's receiving the crook and flail from the god Hatannin here. The earliest representation of them in anthropomorphic form is this relief from the 5th dynasty. It's from the funerary temple of Niuzure. Unfortunately, it's damaged, and even more regrettably is that nobody knows where this fragment is today. It may have been shipped to Germany at the early 20th century, and possibly it's languishing in a museum somewhere, or maybe it was even destroyed during the Second World War. We don't know. But as you can clearly see, we've got these 3 figures pulling on a rope, and above their head you have the hieroglyphs, all the rekhyt people. What are they doing? What are they pulling? I'll come back to that in just a second. But what you find in these anthropomorphic forms is that they're always depicted bare-chested, wearing the typical wraparound kilt, the shended kilt, if you want to call it that. Their hairstyles often vary a little bit, from short cropped hair, shoulder length, or even tripartite styles. You'll often see them with a small goatee beard, or even a curved beard. And rarely, particularly during the Greco-Roman period, they'll have broad collars. These are two scenes which you may recognise, and perhaps they are similar to the one that we saw from the 5th dynasty. Here you can see the Pat people and the Rekhyt people pulling on a rope. This is the funerary procession. So is that what we have in the 5th dynasty? Is that the Rekhyt people participating in the funerary procession of the deceased king? Or is it perhaps pulling the bark of Ray? It's difficult to know. But certainly in the 18th dynasty, what you find is the Rekhyt people participating in the funerary procession of the deceased. And the scene on the bottom is also from the tomb of the Minimum at TT 82. The inscription tells us all the Pat people, all the Rekhyt people, and then clearly they're pulling this rope. On the top, this is the tomb of Ray. And again, we have the Pat people, and we have the Rekhyt people, and although they're not specifically pulling the rope is going through them, and you've got other people pulling it. It's all part of the funerary procession of the deceased. Recognize this one? Ramosi. Anybody see the Rekhyt people though? No. You probably never noticed that they're there, because the inscription is largely destroyed now. But it was published by Davis. The figures that we have up here, this is the Pat people, and this is the Rekhyt people. Again, it's all part of the funerary procession. If I go back one slide, you can see we've got the funerary procession here. Here's the Pat people and the Rekhyt people participating. This is a relief from Bubastis, celebrating the said festival of Ozar Khan II. Can anybody see the Rekhyt people in this one? It's quite difficult sometimes to find them. Top right. Yeah, top right. Here they are. You got these two people kneeling in jubilation, and the inscription says, "Making jubilation by the Rekhyt people." Again, we don't know where this block is. It was recorded by Nabil in the 1880s, but maybe it's still at the site. I haven't been able to find it yet. But here they are, actively participating in the said festival of the Pharaoh. Here we go to Philae, and this is a very interesting relief dating to the reign of Augustus. Augustus here opens the door to the shrine containing Isis and the young god Harper. It's two scenes really in a way. He opens the shrine and he takes out a statue. And here he is, the Pharaoh, holding up the statue directly in front of three Rekhyt people. And this is great iconographically. It's clear as well from the hieroglyphs who they are. But the inscription that runs behind actually tells us that here we have the Rekhyt people performing jubilation 4 times. And 4 is a common number. They perform it to the east, north, south, east, and west, the 4 directions. And as it says here, this is when they do this when they see the statue of the god. So the statue is being presented to the Rekhyt people. Recognize this one, I'm sure? The Red Chapel of Hatshepsut. This is from the inside, in the sanctuary itself. And it's all to do with the festival, a little known festival known as the ritual burning of fans, where they would burn fans which contain representations of the enemies of Egypt. It's only depicted on this temple. We don't know much about it. But here we have a group of priests. We have the Helet-Neter. We have the god's wife up here. We have 3 priests who are called the god's father. We have male attendants, female attendants, 2 female attendants, and this person is called all the Rekhyt people. So you've got these Rekhyt people mingling with the god's wife and the priests, all coming along in procession. The inscription again tells us that they're performing adoration for the gods. And even more importantly is the inscription here, because it tells us that the Rekhyt people are building a bonfire, building a furnace in the court of the temple in order to burn fans. So here they are, specifically setting up, preparing the furnace. It's clear from the inscription. They have access to the weshet, the court of the temple, in order to do this. It's very clear that they are participating in this ritual. For their theriomorphic representations, it's the most common. You have lapwings, usually with human hands, either raised in adoration or in jubilation. But you can also have human figures with lapwing features, such as the complete head of a bird, the lapwing's crest only, or even with their wings pinned back. This is the earliest example of a therioanthropic representation of the rekhyt. It's from a lintel of a Amenemhat I found at Lish, which is now in the Cairo Museum. And again, here's the pharaoh celebrating his Set festival. This is all part of his Set festival. And underneath the throne, you have these lapwings performing jubilation. This one you may recognize from Deir el-Bahri. This is the earliest representation of the rekhyt people with the head of a lapwing. And what you find is a lot of innovations are brought around during the reign of Hatshepsut. It's the first time that we have the rekhyt-rebus. This is actually the rekhyt-rebus that you find. Or you can have them such as this one at Edfu Temple, where you've got the three people, the rekhyt people, and above their head you can just see that they have the crest. That's the only distinguishable feature. But the hieroglyphs also tell us, as you can see just over here, that it's the rekhyt people. The last one that I showed you was also part of the Set festival. So it was the rekhyt people participating in the Set festival. And from Philae, this is very interesting inscription or relief, where you have the two gods on the left-hand side. Here you have the pharaoh, whose name hasn't been included, but behind the pharaoh, with the pharaoh, you've got two people who are called all the rekhyt people, with their crests above their head, and they're performing jubilation along with the pharaoh to the gods. Now you wouldn't expect this from the ordinary people in a way, to be with the pharaoh. And I mentioned how you often have to look very hard to find the rekhyt people. This is from the entrance to the temple of Horus in Edfu. You've got the pharaoh and his queen presenting offerings to Horus and Hathor. But the rekhyt people are there also. Anybody see them?
Yes. In front of the was.
In front where?
Of the was.
Yep. Have to look very closely. Little figures that have been added. Were they originally part of the scene, or were they added in later? And although they don't have the inscription mentioning that it's specifically the rekhyt people, the crest is there, the section that we usually see them performing is there, so it seems very likely that it's the rekhyt people. And you actually find them on the other side of the doorway, so on both sides. So next time you go to Edfu, have a look out for them. Here's another action that they're performing. This is from the papyrus of Anhai, which is in the British Museum. Right up the very top, just here, you have two people lying on the ground, senta, kissing the earth, as it is in hieroglyphs. They have the distinguished lapwing's crest. And although they're not mentioned in this specific text here, in the label, it's from chapter 15 of the Book of the Dead. And chapter 15 actually mentions the rekhyt people kissing the earth. So there's no doubt who it is.
No, the
Yep.
people in front of the Decators, which they raise their hands.
These ones?
Yeah.
They're also mentioned in chapter 15. It's the rekhyt people kissing the earth. I think you have the gods who perform adoration, and then you also have the baboons who are mentioned as well. So it's all part of the. If you look at the text of chapter 15, you'll see that it fits perfectly with this image. If you go to Dendera and you go right into the Holy of Holies at the very back, you'll see on the lower ends of the wall you have the king and queen presenting offerings to the gods, as you can see here. Well, directly behind, you have a rekhyt people here. This is on the back wall, but you also have a frieze that continues on all four walls, like this. They're following the king and queen. But specifically, the inscription that goes here tells us that this is the king and queen presenting offerings with the rekhyt people behind him performing adoration. So the rekhyt. So what was the role of the rekhyt people? Well, as you've seen, there's a high percentage of texts which have them performing actions and gestures. Very interestingly, this increases as we reach the New Kingdom. But also you find that the hieroglyphs change, perhaps also reflecting the role of the rekhyt people. So in the Old Kingdom, it's always written like this, with the lapwing very passive, just as the bird. Middle Kingdom, you have the introduction of the wings in the back, and then in the New Kingdom, you have the addition of the human arms. As I said, reflecting the role of the rekhyt people performing these gestures. And they can be directed, the gestures, to both the pharaoh as well as the gods directly. I call them actions of maintenance. That is where the rekhyt people perform these actions to the pharaoh, for example, and the pharaoh then in turn performs actions to the gods. So you have this continuous cycle, such as this. The pharaoh makes offerings. The rekhyt people make offerings to the pharaoh. The pharaoh make offerings to the gods, and the gods ensure that the rekhyt people survive. It's a continuous cycle. It's actions of maintenance. It's maintaining the cosmos, maintaining order. What happens if you take the rekhyt people out? You don't have a cosmic order because you don't have. You can't have a pharaoh without the people. You need the rekhyt people there. If you take the rekhyt people out of the cycle, you don't have a pharaoh. And if you don't have a pharaoh, you don't have the gods. So they play a very fundamental role in the Egyptian cosmos. One that hasn't really been looked at by Egyptologists before. And actually, you can see that this is a reciprocal arrangement. Everyone is benefiting. The rekhyt people, the pharaoh, and the gods. And here's an inscription that really sums it up. This is one from the Middle Kingdom, of an official who is described as one who satisfies the gods for his majesty. So he's playing the role of the king, satisfying the gods, and one who satisfies his majesty for the rekhyt people. And here he's playing the role of the rekhyt people, satisfying his majesty. So he's taken all roles, ensuring that you have cosmic order. It's really summed up brilliantly in this inscription. So who are the rekhyt people after that? I mean, it's very difficult. Perhaps there's no good word to use to describe them. But as I said, the inscriptions don't seem to support the idea that they're lower class citizens. They play a very active role. And these are just a few words that I'm throwing up here that you don't agree with. Are they worshippers par excellence? Well, the problem is we already have the word duati, which refers to people who worship. Are they the laity? The congregation of believers? This is one that Kenneth had suggested. Could they be the faithful? Or maybe a word that really sums them up, but a lot of people don't like using, is cheerleaders. Are they there during temple festivals, etc., to perform these actions? Just like you have professional mourners during funerals. Are these the rekhyt people who are there during festivals to ensure, to get the crowd going, to kind of ensure that everything is undertaken? A bit like cheerleaders, but not cheerleaders with pom-poms, etc. Don't think of it like that. So it's very difficult to really say who the rekhyt people were, but I hope with this first half of the lecture that you'll really be thinking again as to who they may be. Are they common people, or could they be something more than that? And so for the second part of the lecture, I'll look at specifically at this image, the rekhyt-rebus. I'm sure you have all seen this before. What exactly does it mean?
Give a prize.
Well, the common people.
All the rekhyt people adore, and then the name of the king.
Yeah.
But why is it depicted? Why do you see it? What does it mean if you see it in a temple? Have you read anything about it? The general consensus is that if you see this in a temple, it means that the rekhyt people had access. Right? I'm going to hopefully challenge that idea now. So that next time that you're in a temple or you're doing some guiding, you don't tell people that. You tell them something different. So the rebus is made up of 4 parts, really. You have the lapwing, which can often have the hand raised in adoration. You have the basket, the neb, which means all. You have the dua. Now, it's not always written, and it's not important to be there because you already have the hands raised in adoration. So it's just there really, supplying a little bit more. And then you have the cartouche of the firm. So in this case, all the rekhyt people adore User Matre Sekhet Enre, Ramesses II. Well, this is some theories that have been suggested on the rekhyt people. And it was first Lanny Bell in the 1980s who describes it as bestowing mythological significance on the king's subjects. So he's calling the rekhyt people subjects. Richard Wilkinson, in his Complete Temples book, says that it indicates areas of public gathering or worship. And Peter Brand goes a little bit further by saying that it's a visual sign to the public that they have access to this part of the temple, and that the illiterate could easily be taught to recognize this design as a visual sign saying, you may stand here. So from the 1980s, the idea is that if you see this rebus, it means that the rekhyt people, the common people, the populace, the public, whatever you want to call them, had access to the temple, and that specific part of the temple. When Lanny Bell came up with this theory, he studied Luxor Temple. And unfortunately, he only studied Luxor Temple. So he studied it in isolation. I'll be looking at more temples to really get a better idea of the evidence. Now, I'm not denying that the rekhyt people had access to this part of the temple, this open courtyard of Ramesses II. All the evidence points to it. It's referred to as a place of supplication, a court of appearance, and even a festival court. And also you have this inscription on the eastern side of the enclosure, which refers to it as a place of supplicating and of hearing petitions of gods and men. A clear indication that it was accessible. More specifically, Lanny Bell points out that the rekhyt-rebus, and here you can see in the 2 different forms with the star and without the star, he points out that the rebus is only found on the eastern side of the court, on the columns that are highlighted right there. It's possible that there's more under the mosque, but as you can see, not all the columns, there's 4 of them at least, which aren't decorated with the rebus. They're orientated so that they face the court. So you have 4 facing clockwise, 4 anti-clockwise, with the exception of this one, which I guess must be a mistake by the craftsmen who have one just with one off. And we'll be coming back to the orientation a little bit later. So here's an artist's impression of how the court may have looked like in pharaonic times. You can see that we have the bark of the god come through, you have the elite over this side, the king, his family, etc. While all over on the eastern side of the court, you have the rekhyt, because that's where the rekhyt is located. Was things quite as clear-cut as that? Well, other evidence that we have to support the idea that the court was open to the people, whether it be rekhyt people or others, are the 2 statues, the 2 cast statues of Ramesses II, which Lanny Bell says were accessible to the ordinary people and that they mediated suppliances pleas to the great hidden god whose sanctuary lay beyond. Now they are specifically referred to in the inscription as cast statues, which usually mean that they are statues which are accessible to people. And we do have statues similar to that which mention the rekhyt people. This is the best of them, the statue of Panahesi, which comes from Abydos. It's now in the British Museum, and the inscription that runs along the bottom here, which is very difficult to see there, I'll present the text here, it says, "O my image, may you endure for the sake of my name, the favourite of everyone, that the rekhyt people may stretch out their arms for you, bearing rich bouquets, and may there be given to you libations of incense from the remainder of your Lord, and then my soul comes running, so that you may receive food offerings with you. So these statues, as I'm sure you know, were set up in the courtyards in order to receive libations, foods, etc. But this one is very interesting because it specifically calls upon, it requests the rekhyt people to come stretching out their arms, carrying food, bouquets, whatever it might be, in order to present to the statue. A clear indication that this statue was accessible to the rekhyt people. Otherwise, why put it on there? We have the triple shrine, which also seems to have been accessible, because it's referred to as a place of supplication and of hearing petitions of gods and men. And we have two pretty much identical inscriptions in the chapels of Mut and Khonsu, and here's the one from the chapel of Khonsu, and it says, the making of a monument for his father Khonsu in Thebes, Neferhotep, namely the fashioning of an image of electrum, glittering of every real precious stone, in order to uplift his beauty for the rekhyt people when he is upon his three poles. So here we have the statue of the god being brought out of procession, being carried by the priests in the barn, and as it says, for the rekhyt people. So it's been specifically done for the rekhyt people. In the chapel of Amun, right in the centre, you have this very interesting false door at the very back. It's a very unusual one because you have these two tall staffs called menushepsi staffs. And it seems that this also indicates that it was accessible. This is what Renan says about it. He says, like many humbler cult foci in the Egyptian temples, the false door made the gods accessible to the common man who was not privileged to enter the temples, but had to make his petitions from the outside. So they couldn't go into the temple, but they could go to this false door, and they could talk to the god Amun through this door. Quite interestingly, you find that Lamy Bell actually calls it a telephone booth. So it's almost like picking up the phone and talking directly to the gods. And what we also have to support the idea of the rekhyt people having access, perhaps, is the so-called People's Gate, as Lamy Bell calls it. It's again over on the eastern side, and on the four jambs, the inscription reads, as the great gateway of the king of Upper and Lower Egypt, Uzurmatre Sithep-Enrai, whom all the rekhyt people adore, that they may live. And that last element is important. They're performing their adoration so that they can live. It's very common in the inscriptions. You even have a frieze of people coming. Here you can see the remains of the feet there. You've got these two people preserved. And if you look closely, right in between, we have the identification label. Labeling these people as the rekhyt. And they're facing the doorway. But what do people say about this People's Gate? Baines says that it's the innermost part to which the normal people were allowed to come. Lamy Bell says that the doorway was effectively the People's Gate, and through it, select townsfolk and officials were admitted to stand in the eastern half of the courtyard in order to observe the stately Opet festival procession. El Razik says that it's the inscription suggests that, that this is the door that could be used by the king coming from his palace to be greeted by the rekhyt people. So it seems really that everyone suggests that if you have the rebus, it's an area where the rekhyt people could go, or if you have these doorways, either the frieze or the inscription, it's also where the rekhyt people could go. As I said, while that fit very well in Luxor Temple, and there's no doubt about it that this courtyard was accessible, all the evidence points to it, but do these last two, do the rekhyt-rebus and the People's Gate, or the People's Gate, are they indicators of accessibility? Are they indicators of access to temples? Well, we'll look at other examples now. And in order to better understand it, you need to look at the different areas. The courtyards Certainly these were accessible to the ordinary people. Statues were set up in these areas, similar to Luxor Temple. So it's not surprising if we were to find all these columns decorated with the rekhyt-rebus. What about the hypostyle halls? Do you think the ordinary people would have had access to this area? It's a little bit of a difficult one. But then when we come to the inner sanctuaries, I think you would all agree that this was an area which was excluded for the rekhyt people. Yeah? So looking at the rebus on pillars and columns, this is the temples that I looked at. And it's not important to kind of note that they are, but as you can see, they date from the reign of Hatshepsut right through to the Roman period, Antonius Pius being the last example of Nebuchadnezzar. So for almost 2,000 years of Egyptian history, and then maybe you do find them in the Middle Kingdom, but we don't have any good examples of Middle Kingdom temples that have survived, unfortunately. But as you can see, there's a lot more than just Luxor Temple. So the earliest example is the triple temple at Deir el-Bahri, of Hatshepsut. And right on the third tier, the upper tier, you have the rekhyt-rebus, the festival court. And the name itself suggests that it was accessible. We have on both sides, although not very well preserved anymore, the remains of the rekhyt-rebus. So all the rekhyt people, we've got the basket here, all the rekhyt people adore, there's the remains of the star, and we have Ankh-Sen written underneath it. So all the rekhyt people adore, no doubt Hatshepsut, in order that they may live. We even have an inscription supporting the idea that the rekhyt people had access to the rekhyt-rebus. It refers to the rekhyt-rebus just before this, and it talks of the rekhyt people making jubilation. They give praise to the Lord of the gods. They acclaim Ma'at Kare, Hatshepsut, in the actions that make her divine. So it's almost like performing these actions make her divine. They make her the pharaoh because of the greatness of the marvels that have happened to her. Well, when we come to the reign of Seti I, you also find them on the pillars at Derna. So we have this large temple, and this is just the the inner part. You can see that there are around about 30 pillars, columns here. But which ones have the rekhyt? Where would you expect to find them? Anywhere. You would expect to find them here. But do you know where you find them?
In the back.
Right in the very back, in the Holy of Holies. Does that mean that this part of the temple was accessible? Could the rekhyt people go here? This is where the statue of the god Amun would have been kept. It seems very unlikely that the rekhyt people would have had access to this part of the temple. Even more is that the false door, and there's not much left of it here, but you had a double false door, and you can just see the remains of the rekhyt-rebus that is present there. They flank the door so that when the spirit, the Ka, of the deceased king comes from the Valley of the Kings to his temple to receive the offerings in this room, you have the rekhyt people adoring him on either side. Again, does that mean they have access? Just keep that in mind. I'm sure you all know at the Temple of Amun at Karnak, the great hypostyle hall, 134 columns. Well, they're not all decorated with the rekhyt-rebus. The central 12 are not, but the other 122 are. 8 times on each one. And I have gone through and counted them all. There are a lot. Yeah, think about 1,000 rekhyts or so, all in this one room. Now we have an important inscription from the temple, which is located just here along this axis. And it talks of Ramesses making this temple, making this monument for his father Amun, or Amun-Re, Lord of the Thrones of the Two Lands, foremost in Hatshepsut, Karnak. He made for him an august temple of fine white sandstone, a place where the rekhyt people extolled the great name of His Majesty. So it seems that this area was accessible to the rekhyt people. Now you may think, why a hypostyle hall? Why did they have access? But just bear in mind that when this was being constructed, and this inscription dates to the first year of his reign, it wasn't always a hypostyle hall. It was originally, before all this, in the form of the courtyard, but then when it became enclosed as a hypostyle hall, maybe it became more restricted. It's very difficult to know. They, and I have checked all the orientation of these, they're orientated in two different directions. So you can see these ones flank the north-south axis, and you have this row which flank the east-west axis. Very unusual. This is the only temple in which they flank both axes. But then it's very unusual to have a temple where you do have two main accesses like this. You'll see that some don't seem to go in the right direction. And the reason for that is that in the earthquake from 100 years ago, a lot of the pillars from here had collapsed. When they were restored by the French at the time, they didn't really think too much about how to orientate it. So you'll actually see that none of the columns that are facing the opposite direction are complete. So they were reconstructed wrong, but I don't think they'll ever change. Probably stay as is. The Temple of Seti and Abydos, again, quite interesting. We have them in the first hypostyle hall. Very interesting ones. They're carved by Ramesses II, as you can see up the top. But here you can see these double rekhyts. Has anybody seen this before? Anybody noticed before? I'll come back to this at the end. These double rekhyts. What's going on here? Why do you have these two overlapping rekhyts? But they're on all the columns here. Maybe that area was accessible. Second hypostyle hall, decorated by Seti I. Two different styles, all of them decorated. And the rebuses are all orientated so that they flank the 7 processional routes. This is an unusual temple in that it did have 7 accesses, 7 cult sanctuaries. So you have 4 rebuses facing clockwise, 4 anti-clockwise, so that they face the center. Very nicely done. So while these two hypostyle halls may have been accessible, and you could probably argue for that, what about the inner sanctuary? What about the Azara suite? Again, this is the Holy of Holies. This is the main area of where the god Azara resided. But you have the rekhyt-rebus flanking the processional route. You'll see there's a pattern here. Very common for them to flank the processional route. You even find them over in the small chapel of Nefertoti Sokar as well. The temple of Ramesses and Abydos, Ramesses II. The open courtyard is referred to as a rekhyt, a festival court, and a place of hearing petitions of gods and men. So, evidence that it was accessible. And you do actually find the rekhyt people here on the columns. 3 different forms, with the lapwing's crest, with the head of the lapwing, and with a complete human form. And you can see for this one, they need the hieroglyphs. For this one, they don't, because it's clear that it's the rekhyt people. And the reason why they need the hieroglyphs is because you have the other people. You have the Pat people, the Hennumet people, and the Remage people, who are also on the columns. More interestingly, the 2 octostyle halls. Again, we have the rekhyt people. We have the rekhyt people on pretty much all the columns, almost all the faces, except for the central ones, in which we have the gods of the sky and the gods of the earth. And when we go into the second octostyle hall, you have a variety of people. The rekhyt, the Pat, the Hennumet, the Remage. You have the gods who are in Abydos, the gods who are in the necropolis. So it's becoming more divine, really. You've got a lot of gods who are represented on here. But more significantly, right at the very back, in these 2 chapels, in which you have the 9 niches for the Aeneid, you have the 2 pillars on each one, which are inscribed with the rekhyt-rebus. So again, did they have access to this part? So for the New Kingdom alone, you'll find that the rekhyt-rebus only appears in 1 entrance. 5 courtyards. These are areas where you would expect them to have access. Hypostyle hall is one of those tricky things, but then there are 7 examples, 7 temples where you have the rekhyt-rebus within the inner sanctuaries, and just one unknown. What about the Greco-Roman period? Well, you have a kind of a similar thing. There's slightly more in the courtyards. You'll see here that there's none in the inner sanctuaries, but the reason for that is you don't get columns or pillars in a Greco-Roman temple. The furthest you really see them is the hypostyle halls. So you can already see here, we've got them in the pronaos, we've got them in the hypostyle halls. So they're right through the temple, not exclusively in the exterior parts, which would have been accessible. So that's the columns. But you also have them in friezes, again from the reign of Hatshepsut, right through to the Roman period. So the Red Chapel of Hatshepsut at Deir el-Bahri. If this was the Holy of Holies, where the statue of Amun would have been located, I find it very difficult to believe that this area would have been accessible to the general populace, if that's who they are. We have the way stations of Hatshepsut. Unfortunately, not much of them preserved, but I certainly believe that there's one at Luxor and there's one down near the Moon complex. But in the Triple Shrine at Luxor, you may have seen this block before, which Lanny Bell talks about. And he says that this is the Pat people. His reason for saying it's the Pat people is because when he examined the blocks which were reused within the Triple Shrine, he said that there were blocks of people with the Lapwing's head in adoration. Unfortunately, they're not published, and I've never seen any pictures of them, but I'd love to be able to know. But it seems that these blocks come from the Triple Shrines. And they continue, as I say, right through into the Ptolemaic period. These are large blocks from the sanctuary of El Hagar in the Delta. Beautiful replics. At Edfu Temple, from the pronaos, you have a frieze of lapwings at the bottom, at the screen walls. And these funny looking ones, these are from the sanctuary of Kalapsha, which is now rebuilt on elephantry. So this is from the sanctuary, the Holy of Holies itself. Next time you go to Denver, when you go to the Wadat, have a look out, because you find the rekhyt-rebus on both sides, both on the exterior as well as the interior faces. And certainly this area wouldn't have been accessible to the open. So if we look at the distribution of them, you actually find that there are more in the inner sanctuaries than anywhere else. Exterior walls, there's only 3. Even if you add up the pronaos and the exterior walls, it's still less than the inner sanctuaries. And doorways are similar. Doorways mentioned in the rekhyt people first appear in the coffin texts as well as the pyramid texts. But they're usually there to restrict access, to restrict the rekhyt people from getting access to the afterlife. But in the New Kingdom, or at least from the New Kingdom onwards, they exist as physical doorways. Doorways through which people can pass through. And again, this is just the doorways with friezes, not the named doorways. So you can see dating from the 19th dynasty right through to the Roman period. One from Buhem, this is an earlier one, this is Tutmosis III, but it's an inscription. And on the doorway, it's called the doorway, Great Doorway of the King of Upper and Lower Egypt, blah blah blah, whom all the rekhyt people adore. So there it is, Great Doorway of Menkapereh, whom the rekhyt people adore before Horus. Was this doorway accessible? If the one at Luxor Temple was accessible, based on what Bell and Baines and everybody else was suggesting, then surely that theory should fit for all of the doorways and not just one. Or have they got it wrong? You find a similar one at Gurf Hussein, slightly deeper within the temple, just at the entrance to the hypostyle hall. But as we go further into the temple, we find these 2 pillars with friezes of rekhyt people. And there's a photograph of it from New Kalapsha. It's very much damaged, but there are traces of hieroglyphs there, and it's definitely the rekhyt people. Even more so is the doorway flanking the actual sanctuary itself. You can just see that there's the remains of 4 people in adoration, and presumably you would have had the same on the other side. I don't know if this doorway was rescued from Lake Nasser or not, so I don't have access to see whether the inscription tells us that it's the rekhyt people, but as you can clearly see, all the iconography, etc., indicates that it is them, and it's flanking the doorway to the sanctuary. And similar at Wadi El Sabua, 3 doorways have friezes of rekhyt people on the left-hand side. So I should say the rekhyt people are on the left-hand side only, and on the right-hand side, very interestingly, this one is not the rekhyt people, but the Henmanet people, even though they have the crest. So they have the crest, but the inscriptions tell us that it's the Henmanet people. And this is one on the right-hand side also, which was drawn by a French scholar who says that they are clearly Syrians, even though the inscription tells us that it's the Henmanet. And you can see her drawing, how she's done them with pointy beards, like the Syrian appearance, as opposed to how they actually do appear here. Medina Tabu, you'll be familiar with. Have you seen the rekhyts here? Very interesting ones, right up there. Because what you actually have is Ramesses II taken on the appearance of the rekhyt people. He has the crest, he has the lapwing bird wings, but he still has the kingly regalia. He has the beard, he wears the shendig kilt, and in other scenes he has the moon's tail. So this is the pharaoh, part rekhyt, part pharaoh. Why is he depicted like this? He's the only pharaoh like this. Now what is very interesting is that he also is one of the few pharaohs to have the title King of the rekhyt. Nessie rekhyt. There's only him and Amenhotep III who have that title. And then Osiris also has it. So that's very interesting, and perhaps that's why he's depicted like this. Chapel of Osiris Hekajet, right at the entrance where you see the letter A. We have another doorway like this, which is named. And then when we get into the Greco-Roman period, here we have the Temple of Khonsu, Karnak. We have the friezes of lapwings flanking 2 doorways. And even in Dush, in the Roman period, in the oasis, these are flanking the entrance to the sanctuary. So if we look again at their distribution, you see that they appear in the inner sanctuaries more than any other place. And to sum it all up as to the areas where you find them, you see that if we add everything together, you find the rekhyt-rebus in the Holy of Holies more than any other part of the temple. So, what do we do about this? Do we change all the Egyptological literature and say that the rekhyt people had access to the temple completely, including the inner sanctuaries? Or do we look for a new interpretation of the rekhyt-rebus? Does it really indicate areas which were accessibility? I don't think so, and I don't think the evidence supports it. There's too many in the inner sanctuaries to support the idea. But you have to bear in mind also their orientation. The orientation is important, and what they're doing is important. So here's the Temple of Khonsu. And you can see that the rebuses and the doorways are all orientated to flank the centre. These all go this way, and they all go that way, so that they're flanking the central access. Now I mentioned the first hypostyle hall, the Temple of Seti and Abydos, with the double-headed rekhyts, the little ones. They're all on these pillars. So here's another view. You can see that it's the whole way around. What's going on here? Anybody any idea?
Carve above each other, changing the inscription.
But why? Is it a mistake because of the orientation?
No.
Partially, but it's much more detailed than that. Much more detailed, I shall see. And that's just a close-up of one. If you actually look closely, you'll see that obviously this one was done first, but it was done in the opposite direction. And then this one was done next, and then the hieroglyphs were added on top of the wings. Of course, it would have been plastered over, and nobody would have noticed, but that plaster has fallen off. Both of those date to the reign of Ramesses II. So it has to be a scribal error. But what you find if you look closer, anybody notice anything there? How many rekhyts are there?
2.
2.
2.
And they're going in both the same direction. So that's a bit of a problem. It's not. It wasn't done to correct a mistake. It's actually been done. And if you look closely, now, if you look just up here, you'll see that we have a nice orange circle.
Yes.
This is how they're done for the reign of Seti I. He does his with the sun disk on top of the cartouche. And if we go back to that again, what we actually have is the sun disk on top of the cartouche. So, if you look at all of these pillars, you'll find that every single one of them was reworked. They were originally done for Seti I, but Ramesses came along, recarved them. Again, look at this one. And what I'll do is just give you the line drawing that I've done for it. It was originally done for Seti I, and he's still got part of his cartouche, the main master actually. Why did he change it? So he changed it from raised relief to sunk relief. Was that the only way, or the only reason? Why is the orientation different? Why didn't he just do it directly on top of one another? And I think this is important, because what you find is that Seti I had all the rekhyts originally to flank the 7 accesses of the temple, because there were 7 doorways. That's how the rekhyts are orientated during the reign of Seti I. But what does Ramesses do?
Closed.
Well, he blocks up the doorways. He blocks these up, and he builds this dedicatory inscription. And instead of them having to flank the 7 accesses, they now flank the central access. So he's changed it. He's changed the orientation. And I think that's quite significant. Why has he changed it? And I think it certainly explains what the rekhyt people are doing there. They don't need to be flanking the 7 accesses, because they don't exist anymore. These ones do, and they have been kept the same. So he's only changed the ones in this. So they now flank the central access and then into the 7.
But the middle one should be.
The middle ones were okay, they didn't need to be changed,
Yeah.
because they were already flanking the central. So they all flank the central. Yeah. So, conclusions. What is the function of the rekhyt-rebus? Is it an indicator of accessibility? I hope I've now shown you that it's not, because you do find them throughout the temple. Some people have even said that it was simply there for decorative purposes, as a filler, because there was empty space. Now, if that is the case, why would they have changed the rebus not once, but twice at the temple of Seti at the White House? You've actually got three rekhyts on top of one another in cases, because they had to change it from the raised relief to the sunk relief, and then they had to change the ones that they made the mistake on, where you have the 2 Ramesses ones on top of one another. So 3 times you have different rekhyts. So I think we can rule that out. So I'd like to propose a new interpretation, is that the rebuses here are a symbolic breeding and the worshipping of both the pharaoh, and more in particular within the temples of the gods. And you can see that they clearly have a link with the access of the temple, the central access. And what I should have mentioned earlier is that we have a papyrus dating to the Ptolemaic period, which is a manual for how to decorate a temple. And just recently, Jochen Quack found a page in which it describes how the rebus should be located in the temples, and that it should always be orientated so that it flanks the access to the temple. Specifically, this is what it says. I think it's all to do with the active participation of the rekhyt people. They don't need to have physical access to the temple, but they can be there metaphysically. Now, I'm sure when you've all learned hieroglyphs before, you've been told that hieroglyphs were alive. The Egyptians believed that they were alive, they often have animals with knives through them so that they can't jump off the walls. You have to bear that in mind. Hieroglyphs were very much active. Hieroglyphs were alive. So the rebuses on the pillars, they could move as far as the Egyptians and continually adoring the gods. And that's why you find them in the sanctuaries. I should have mentioned also the palace from Merenptah at Memphis. You even find the rekhyt-rebuses in the bedroom of the pharaoh. That's not an area where the common people was going to have access. And I think it's all this reciprocal arrangement that I mentioned earlier. The rekhyt people need to adore the pharaoh needs to adore the gods, and the gods look after the people. If you take the rekhyt people out of that cycle, you have the collapse of Ma'at, you have Ispet. And so, as I said, bear in mind that these rekhyts could come alive. They were active, and here's just the plan of the Temple of Khomsu to give you an idea that as the statue of the god would come out in procession, there you have the rekhyts perpetually adoring the pharaoh and performing their actions of maintenance. Yeah. So I think this is really the gist of it, and the gist of what the rekhyt people were there to do. So thank you very much for the invitation from here, from everybody and the audience for attending today. I hope when you go to Luxor Temple or any of the other temples next, you don't tell people that this indicates areas of accessibility, but think about it a little bit more. It's a much deeper topic than what a lot of people think. Yeah, I hope you enjoyed that. Thank you.
Thank you.
What is that?
I have this question.
Yes?
There's a